Hello and welcome to this video on indicators of growth. So this video is in our series on globalization, and what we're going to be looking at in this video is how or the indicators a business might look at to better understand the performance of an economy. And there are 5 that we're going to look at, 2 to do with GDP, and then literacy, health, and HDI. So let's start off with GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product. And this is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a country in a year. And economists will use the concept of GDP to measure the size of an economy and whether more or less is being produced. And businesses will maybe look at this and say, right, is the economy growing? Is more being produced? Is the economy getting wealthier? Or actually, is there being less being produced? Is the economy getting poorer? And maybe use that to inform their strategy. This figure is normally estimated by governments. Okay, our second indicator of growth is GDP per capita. And this is calculated by taking the GDP, the national income, or the GDP, and dividing it by the population. So saying how much is being produced per person. And this is commonly used to measure a country's living standards. As the output per person rises, you could assume that there are more goods and services for each individual within that country, and so that living standards should rise. So economists might prefer this measure of economic performance and economic growth as it's per person and takes into account changes in population size that GDP by itself doesn't. It's normally expressed in US dollars, and so that allows for comparisons between nations. And on the right hand side here we can see that comparison, and we can see that the countries with the highest GDP per capita tend to be North America, Western Europe, Australasia, or you do get some countries like Saudi Arabia, because of their oil production, have a very high level of output per person. The lower levels of output per person, lower standards of living, tend to be around Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and Central Africa, as well as some parts of Southeast Asia. The third measure of economic performance we're going to need to be aware of that a business might take into consideration is literacy rates. So the percentage of the population that can read and write. And this is considered a key indicator of growth. Investment in human capital raises the average level of literacy in an economy, and businesses might benefit from higher literacy, both through a more skilled workforce to produce their products, but also if they're more literate, then the population probably earn more and therefore become better potential customers. Again, on the right hand side here, we have some comparisons of literacy rates around the world. And again, the trend, the correlation of the trend between GDP per capita and literacy is fairly strong. Again, North America, Europe tend to have the highest literacy rates, and then sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa tend to have the lowest. The fourth measure that businesses might consider is the health of the countries. As a healthy labour force is likely to be more productive and therefore less days off work, less health-related issues for the workforce. Again, child health will affect the literacy rates, and that will in turn affect the supply and the quality of workers to deliver future growth. Poor health disproportionately affects poor people, as normally they rely more on their physical attributes to earn money, which is particularly true of people in less developed countries. One way we might consider the quality of health within a country is to look at life expectancy. And again, on the right hand side, we have a comparison between male and females of life expectancy. Again, the highest countries up here and the lowest countries down here. The last indicator of economic performance that we need to be aware of is what's known as HDI, which stands for the Human Development Index. And this was created in 1990 to monitor the performance of economies and is broken down into a number of different categories that are trying to measure the achievement of people rather than just income and GDP. So it looks at 3 criteria. First of all, life expectancy at birth. Secondly, the number of years of schooling. And then lastly, the gross national income per person. So what is the income per person? What is the quality of the education? And what is the quality of the health? That's what they're trying to get out through these 3 measures. They're equally weighted, and an average is taken and an index is created. The countries can then be ranked from best to worst. The top mark is 1 and the bottom is 0. It doesn't take into account things like poverty or any other measures of deprivation, so it's not a complete answer, but it does give us a good idea of how developed an economy is. If we look at the rankings from around the world, so a green colour here indicates a high score, nearly 1. A very red colour indicates a low score, nearly 0.2. We can see the most developed countries, again, North America, Western Europe, and Australasia, and Japan. And then some of the less developed countries, again, Sub-Saharan Africa, some Southeast Asian countries score lower. So in this video, we've looked at key indicators of economic growth. We need to understand that businesses might use this information to interpret their strategies. So for example, if you have a business that is targeting a certain demographic, maybe elderly people, then health might be a key and life expectancy might be a key measure of the economy's performance that they would need to look at. If they're looking at luxury designer clothing, then maybe GDP per capita would be an important consideration. However, if they're considering where to base their location and they want to manufacture things at the lowest cost they can, they might look at potentially a combination of low GDP per capita but reasonable literacy in order to get a cheap but effective workforce. So businesses should be able to interpret these figures to inform their strategy. That's it. Thanks very much.